So in this part, I'm going to look at those things which constitute one's being according to Scripture. Scripture describes all of these things as being an integral part of one's being: one's heart, one's body, of course, the vessel which one inhabits, the soul, and one's spirit are all components which are to some degree interrelated, and to some degree they are distinct one from the other. The heart, the concept of the heart in Hebrew encapsulates one's mind and one's will, if you like, where one's emotions are. So if we look in Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, I find it interesting that it says, "You shall love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." So what's interesting to me about this is that these three things that are listed here are listed as belonging to one's heart, one's soul, and one's might. So one is not one's heart, one is not one's soul, certainly not one's might. The you that is being referred to is something that is external to the heart, the soul, and the might. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 23 says, "And the Elohim of peace himself set you completely apart, and your entire spirit and soul and body." So they are listed here as distinct components. Hebrews 4 verse 12 says, "For the word of Elohim is living and working and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to the dividing of soul and spirit." So it speaks of the soul and spirit as being distinct, able to be divided, but as that being something which is difficult, that the word of Elohim can even divide soul and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. So the heart being referred to here isn't the heart that we would think of as the one in our chest. It's talking conceptually of one's thoughts and one's intentions, what we might call the mind, and may think of as residing in one's head, in one's brain. But the heart that's being discussed here isn't localized in an organ, it is one's will, one's intentions. 1 Corinthians 14 to 15 says, "For if I am praying in a tongue, my spirit is praying, but my understanding is without fruit." So one's spirit and one's understanding, one's thoughts, one's mind is distinct from one's spirit. "What then is it? I shall pray with the spirit, and I shall pray with the understanding. I shall sing with the spirit, and I shall also sing with the understanding." So the spirit is distinct from the understanding. But in 1 Corinthians 2 verse 11, Paul says, "For who among men knows the thoughts of a man, except the spirit of a man that is in him?" So the spirit and the understanding are distinct from one another, yet the spirit knows the thoughts. Job 7 verse 11 says, I do not hold my mouth, I speak in the distress of my spirit, I complain in the bitterness of my soul." So again, spirit and soul are distinct, yet able to be divided by the word of Elohim. "My soul longs for you in the night, also my spirit within me seeks you earnestly." In Genesis 2 4 to 7 it says, "These are the toldot of the heavens and the earth." So that is, these are the things which were brought forth from the heavens and the earth, when they were created in the day that Yehovah Elohim made the earth and the heavens. Now no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for Yehovah Elohim had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the entire surface of the ground. And Yehovah Elohim formed the man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils breath of life, and the man became a living soul. So the breath of life from Yehovah is what made the dust of the earth come to life. He formed the man, breathed the breath of life into him, and man became alive. Genesis 9:3-4 says, "Every moving creature that lives is food for you. I have given you all as I gave the green plants. But do not eat its flesh with its soul, its blood." Okay, so we can see from scripture some interesting things about the soul which are not generally thought of or generally known among men. It says its blood here. If you eat its blood, you would be eating its soul, which is a weird kind of way to think about it. Leviticus 17:13-14 further says, "Any man from the children of Israel or from the strangers who sojourn with you, who hunts and catches any beast or bird which is eaten, shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. For it is the soul of all flesh. Its blood is for its soul. And I said to the children of Israel, do not eat the blood of any flesh, for the soul of all flesh is in its blood." That's literally what it says. You might not get it translated like that, but just like with the two deaths not being translated because men do not have the understanding to translate it as such, here we can see this is literally what the Hebrew says, and yet men translate it in a way perhaps that they imagine to be easier to understand. Leviticus 17:10-11 says, "I shall set my face, my panim, or my presence against the soul who eats blood, and shall cut him off from among his people. For the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given you upon the altar, I've given it to you rather, the blood upon the altar to kafar," that word again, "to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." Psalm 43 verse 5 says, "Why are you depressed, O my soul, and why are you restless within me?" And we see throughout scripture that one's soul is within one. Psalm 42, "O my soul is depressed within me." Lamentations, "My soul bows down within me." O my soul, and all that is within me. So one's soul is within one. Genesis 35 verse 18 says, "And it came to be as her soul was going out, for she died." So we see that one soul is within you, within one, and when one dies, one soul goes out, and we will see where one soul goes to. It's already been mentioned. It is Sheol, but you'll see that from scripture as we go through. So Yehovah formed the man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils breath of life. And it is this breath which makes one alive. Job 33 verse 4 says, "The spirit of El has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life." That is just Job's understanding, and we don't know where he got that understanding, as I mentioned before, but that's what he says also. In Psalm 104 29-30 it says, "You hide your face, they are alarmed, you take away their breath, they die and they return to their dust. You send forth your spirit, they are created, you renew the face of the earth." In Luke 23 verse 46, when Yeshua died, we see he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he let out his last breath. So it is the breath of the Almighty which gives us life, and not only us. You see, they went into the ark to Noah, 2 by 2 of all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Job 12 verse 10 says, in whose hand is the life of all that live, and the breath of all mankind. When his friend Elihu is rebuking him, he says, if he sets his heart on him, should he gather to himself his spirit and his breath. And as we saw, the spirit is gathered to Elohim upon death. The breath of life is removed and one dies. All flesh would expire together, and man return to dust. Genesis 3 verse 19 says, by the sweat of your face you are to eat bread, until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return, or to dust you return. So Elihu is correct in what he says. Ecclesiastes 12 6-7 says, remember him before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the jar shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to Elohim who gave it. So man's body here is figuratively spoken as the golden bowl being broken, the jar shattered at the fountain, and the dust of such returns to the earth. The spirit, which is within man, returns to Elohim. So upon one's death, one's body dies. It will be buried, cremated, whatever it would be. One's spirit returns to Elohim, and one's soul leaves one's body and goes to Sheol. Psalm 16 8-11 says, I have set Yehovah always before me, because he is at my right hand, and I am not shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my esteem rejoices, my flesh also dwells in safety. For you do not leave my soul in hell. You will see in many translations, leave my soul in hell. But the Hebrew word there is Sheol. So we see that one's soul upon death would be in Sheol. But David speaks of his flesh dwelling in safety because Yehovah does not leave his soul in Sheol. Neither let your kind one see corruption. For you show me the path of life, in your presence is joy to satisfaction. At your right hand are pleasures forever. Okay, so David speaks basically of Yehovah having shown him the path of life, the path of righteousness, how it is that it can be that even when we're dead, our souls will not be left in Sheol. Our souls will be risen in a new body, in a spirit body, because flesh and blood can't inherit the kingdom of Elohim anyway. Psalm 116 4-7 says, Then I called upon the name of Yehovah. O Yehovah, I pray to you, deliver my soul. Yehovah shows favor and is righteous, and our Elohim is compassionate. Yehovah guards the simple. I was brought low, but he saved me. Return to your rest, O my soul, for Yehovah has treated you well. 1 Corinthians 15 36-44 gives us some more information about this concept. It says, Senseless ones, what you sow is not made alive unless it dies. And as to what you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain. It might be wheat or some other grain. But Elohim gives it a body as he wishes, and to each seed a body of its own. So the body which we are sown in originally is the physical body, and that will die, but that will not be the body which we will have ultimately, as Paul goes on to explain. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. There are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the esteem of the heavenly is truly one, and the esteem of the earthly is another. So the earthly body that we have is made of flesh of one sort. The heavenly body which we have, which is of greater esteem, will also be made of flesh. We kind of think of spirit and flesh as distinct, but there are different sorts of flesh. Spirit in the scriptures is not kind of this ethereal idea that we have from Greek philosophy and from other religious traditions, that spirits are, sort of ghosts, or that they don't have, they're not tangible, that they are ethereal. But that's not how scripture explains spirit. When we see angels, for example, or when we see Elisha's servant able to see those things which are around him, these things have a physicality to them. They are of a different sort to the flesh of our human bodies, but to speak of them as some kind of ethereal thing is not how scripture describes it. We're going to have to recalibrate our idea of what spirit is. One esteem of the sun, and another esteem of the moon, and another esteem of the stars, for star differs from star in esteem. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. Sometimes we can think of incorruption as not being corrupt, like morally corrupt, like, we might speak of politicians as being corrupt, or whatever else, but that's not the sort of corrupt it's talking about. Something which is corruptible in scripture is something which can die. So it's sown in corruption, our physical body that can die. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in disrespect. It is raised in esteem. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. So again, a spiritual body isn't going to be something that can walk through walls or anything like that. It's going to have a degree of physicality to it. So we will be able to, for example, plant our fields with produce to eat. We'll be able to interact with the world when we have spiritual bodies, just like we can with our physical bodies. The earth is going to be made new, and our spiritual bodies are going to be the things upon the earth. It's not going to be a spiritual earth or anything like that, but the idea of a spirit that we have in our minds is very different to how scripture actually describes it. So we need to be careful when reading in scripture of spirits or things that are spiritual, that we don't interject into that, or we don't inject into that rather, our idea of spirits. And so it has been written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam, or the last man, a life-giving spirit. So we saw before that the soul is in the blood, but flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. So if the blood is what keeps one alive initially, perhaps it is the spirit which keeps one alive subsequently. Jeremiah 32 verse 41 tells us something that is very interesting for us to consider. This is Yehovah speaking, and he says, I shall rejoice over them to do good to them, and shall plant them in this land in truth with all my heart and with all my soul. So Yehovah speaks of himself as having a heart and also as having a soul. Leviticus 26 verse 11 says, "And I shall set my dwelling place in your midst, and my soul shall not reject you." Judges 10:16 also speaks of Yehovah as having a soul. So they put away the foreign gods from their midst and served Yehovah, and his soul was grieved with the trouble of Israel. So when it speaks of Yehovah as having a heart and having a soul, it could be that he actually has a heart and a soul, or it could be speaking figuratively, and he could be using what is called an anthropomorphism, which is when you give something which is not human attributes. And we see this is done all the way through Scripture. Exodus 7 verse 5 says, "The Mitzrites, the Egyptians, shall know that I am Yehovah when I stretch out my hand on Mitzrayim." And of course, Yehovah didn't stretch out a physical hand on Mitzrayim. This is an anthropomorphism. This is him being given human attributes as having hands. We also see his hand in Isaiah 26. "The earth is my footstool." Does he have feet? "Your strong arm," being spoken of, "you have scattered your enemies with your strong arm." The eyes of Yehovah. So when it speaks of him having a soul, we know Elohim is spirit. We are told that, and that is not saying Elohim has a spirit, it's saying Elohim is spirit. Perhaps he has a soul, or perhaps it is spoken of figuratively, so that we as humans who have hearts and souls can relate to where he's coming from when he says that he will do it with all his heart and all his soul.